one of the things I just want to ask you personally is how it is that you decided to look into the Fast and Furious topic with all the scandals out there. How in the world did you hone that topic to write about it?
Well, this was something that happened years ago now, unfortunately, and it was one of the first big scandals that we saw within the Obama administration, probably the original biggest scandal with the most body bags to this day.
Yeah.
And I got into it because Cheryl Atkinson is really the one who kind of broke the story into the mainstream. But I, heard her stories and went on to cleanupatf.org and was reading the blogs of two people named David Caudrea and Mike Vanderborough. And Fast and Furious was actually broken through the blogosphere, not through mainstream media, not through anything else. And I just sat there thinking about it, and it didn't make any sense to me that the Obama administration, the same administration that started off Obama's first term in Mexico, talking about how Mexico was a priority and ending gun violence there was a priority, why would they be sending guns to reckless narcotics terrorists down in Mexico? And it made absolutely no sense to me. And so being from Arizona, I kind of knew the territory, started spending a lot of time there, talking to people, contacting people, and it really just kind of snowballed into this thing I was doing almost on a daily basis, which then turned into the story too big not to make it into a book. To tie all the players together, tie all the pieces together, the timeline, and then to get it out into another media, which is the bookstores, of course.
Yeah. And so, of course, your book got tons of attention and did very, very well, but the media still doesn't really want to talk about this. They want to sweep it under the rug like they do Benghazi and other things. How did you feel about the media coverage first of your book's release? I know I saw it all over the conservative media, but I'm talking about the mainstream media. And secondly, do you think it will be brought back at all? Do you think the media will revisit this?
Well, right now, the reason it's been a little bit quiet is because we're stuck in a court battle. The Oversight Committee is fighting the Obama administration over, executive privilege and whether certain Fast and Furious documents have to be released. So the court system has everything held up. But in terms of how the media covered it, it was pretty pathetic. And CNN barely touched it. MSNBC didn't touch it hardly at all. The big networks didn't touch it. The only, CBS covered it, but everyone else had a tendency to let it go. The one outlet that did a really great job was Univision, who actually sent reporters into Mexico, which is a very dangerous thing to do now. I don't know if your listeners know this, but Mexico is now the #1 country in the world for journalist assassination. It's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan, it's Mexico. And so they sent some of their people down there to really get to the bottom of what happened. And it's just, I don't really know how to explain why the media is not covering it. I mean, we've seen the murder of a Mexican beauty queen. We saw during the Univision report that, these guys walked into a birthday party of 15-year-olds and mowed everyone down with Fast and Furious guns. We're seeing public officials being assassinated by cartel members using these weapons. And yet, no one really seems to care. And I think it's quite unfortunate that they don't, because people are dying, they're going to continue to die, and the administration is doing nothing but covering it up.
Where do you think Fast and Furious lists, if Katie Pavlich got to decide what news media would be covered today, which crises would be covered today, where would Fast and Furious rank in that list if it was up to you?
Well, I think for me it would probably be #1 or #2. I think #1 would probably be, for me, the IRS, just because I think that is such an abuse of power that can really ruin people's lives. It doesn't kill anyone necessarily, but it's just such an abuse that leads to so many other bad things down the road that I just think that's a really scary thing. But in terms of the body count, we always compare things to Watergate. It almost gets cliche to do so, but no one was killed in Watergate, and we have not only federal agents here in the United States being killed, but hundreds of Mexican citizens being killed. And it's really hard to take when you have a president who claims he doesn't want, quote, assault rifles and military-style rifles in the hands of American civilians, but yet he has a Justice Department that had no problem sending them to the very people who are leaving headless, feetless, handless bodies on the side of the freeways in Mexico. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. It makes no sense.
Well, it's interesting to me, and I read what you write about Mexico because I've been studying and writing a little bit about Mexico and the avocado cartels. It just sounds insane, but it's just a fact that that's happening, and you know that. And you wrote today about women in Mexico rising up and planning to do something about these cartels. Tell us about that, Katie.
Yeah, so we're seeing now, so in Mexico, they actually do have somewhat of a Second Amendment. It's just ignored. In Mexico, it's very difficult to obtain a firearm legally. Right. The only people who have them are the police and the cartels. But, you know, these women have seen these atrocities take place in their communities for years and years and years, you know, really since 2006 when things got bad. 50,000 people have been killed since 2006 in Mexico as a result of these cartel wars between themselves. And these women are standing up and saying, you know what, the government's not protecting us. I'm sick of seeing this happening to my community. I'm sick of it seeing it happen to my country. We're going to stand up and do something about it. So they're, you know, working together in these kind of like roving self-defense, you know, pods, really, in different communities in Mexico. And they're, you know, clashing with the cartels. And I think it's great to see the citizenry finally standing up and saying, well, to the government and the criminals that, look, we're not going to be victims here. And clearly the government hasn't done anything in the past almost decade now to protect us.
Yeah.
It's time to take it into our own hands.
Yeah, because they pay off the low-wage cops that are supposed to be arresting them. And so it's very simple. Right. I saw it play out. I lived in Hawaii briefly, and I saw it play out just exactly like that. And I live now right on the border, and this is something I've really wanted to go in and cover. And I'm not going to lie, it is a conversation I had right before the show today. Do we go down there and cover some of this? Because of what you said, it's the number one place for a journalist to die. Right. I want to shift gears for just a moment, and I want to ask you a little bit about this incident with this baseball player being killed. You wrote about this. You posted Alan West's tweet about it, which I thought was interesting. He said, "We were bored and decided to kill somebody. 3 black teens shoot white jogger. Who will the president identify with this time?" And you proposed a question at the end of your post. If Obama had a son, would he look like Chris Lane? I thought that was fascinating, and I tweeted that out, and I want to get your take on where are all the race baiters? Where are all the people that like to pontificate on this topic right now? Katie, why aren't they saying anything? And why isn't this president making any comment on this tragedy?
Because it doesn't fit their agenda, right? And that's the bottom line. You know, Al Sharpton doesn't benefit when they're, you know, what he would call people of his community are committing crimes. And he's not willing to address the crime rate in his community, as he talks about all the time. He's willing to make up situations like in the George Zimmerman case that had absolutely nothing to do with race in order to push a narrative. Right. That entire situation was based on a lie. You know, this situation is horrific. It wasn't a self-defense case. It was a case of black teenagers being bored. And why is that? Because 70% of black children are now born into single-parent homes without a father. Why are they so bored they have nothing to do on a Friday afternoon that they need to go on a joyride to kill someone? The Daily Caller has now compiled a bunch of tweets from one of the alleged, you know, black males who was involved in this incident, you know, talking about how he hates white people and actually citing the George Zimmerman case, and talking about how he hates 90% of white people. And yet you don't have the Al Sharptons coming out and saying, you know, we condemn that behavior. We have racism in America, but we're not gonna, you know, ignore the fact that this is inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, you don't have the president coming out either.
Right, and he won't say anything. You know, he didn't say anything when that baby got shot in the face in Georgia. He's not going to say anything about this case, even though it's an international incident now. By the way,
because the guy was from Australia originally, correct?
Right, exactly. And I just love how, you know, with Trayvon Martin, who's portrayed as this perfect angel, which if you dig deeper, he wasn't. Yeah. And now we have this dead, murdered Australian baseball player who was here on a scholarship, going to college, no criminal record, you know, never broke a law in his life, and there's no talk about that from the administration or from Al Sharpton. It's completely disgusting to me.
Yeah, it is. It is completely disgusting. There's so much I want to ask you about, but time will only allow so much. I want to get to, you had an interesting conversation with the NYPD regarding their gun confiscations. I think this story is huge. because certainly if this were a gun show, for example, or if this were the Dr. Gina show and I decided to lay guns out like the NYPD did in your story, I would be in huge trouble. Talk to us about this.
You would be arrested for brandishing a weapon and
Yeah.
pointing it towards someone else in a dangerous fashion.
Yeah.
So the NYPD did this, 250, they confiscated 250 guns off the street from criminals who were buying and selling them illegal in New York City, which is great. I credit the street cops for doing that. I appreciate the undercover cops for taking those out of the hands of criminals, which should be the goal. But then you have the issue of Mayor Bloomberg, who always has to, never let anything go to waste when it comes to public, publicity and public relations.
Yeah.
He thinks it's a good idea to lay out 250 of these guns on all of these tables. They're all pointed towards the audience, hundreds of them, not one, not two, hundreds of them. The safeties are off, the bolt actions are closed, and the magazines are still in the firearms.
Right.
Violating every single rule that I've ever learned.
And they were all pointed at people. They
had
at
people. Right.
Yeah.
And the number one rule in gun safety, we all know, is that every gun is loaded, right? Whether it is or not. You treat every gun as if it's loaded. And I called the NYPD to ask if it was standard safety practice for them to point hundreds of guns into an audience. The first time I got hung up on. And the second time, the officer tried to question my credibility and asked how, from my vantage point in Virginia, I could see that the safeties were off, that the guns were pointed toward the audience, and that the actions were closed. And I had to politely say, well, sir, I've seen photos of this, which was the point of the entire press conference and laying the guns out was to take photos for your photo op,
Yeah.
So it was, and I understand there's some frustration with people saying, well, why aren't you focusing on the good use of those guns being out of the hands of criminals? And that's a fair point, but the larger point is, when you have someone like Michael Bloomberg using the NYPD to push his anti-gun agenda on a national level, him doing things like that, and then, completely ignoring all these laws that law-abiding and safety procedures that law-abiding people always, make sure that they do, so that there aren't any problems, really limits his credibility. Well, he's out preaching about gun violence. Well, the way you reduce, quote, gun violence is you're safe with a gun.
Yeah.
And if the NYPD is not going to be safe with a gun, then who's going to be safe with a gun?
That's just a great, very relevant point, I thought. And I thought your conversations with him were interesting. And folks will have to check that out at townhall.com. The RNC boycott of CNN and NBC debates, if Clinton decides if they decide to run the Clinton specials that they are saying they're going to. This feels to me, in the midst of all the things that I think the RNC should be focused on, a little bit like some symbolism over substance. Plus, how in the heck else are we going to reach the low information voters if we don't go to the mainstream media networks? So I'm one of those who's saying I don't think this is such an important thing. I don't think this is such a great point. I just wanted to get your take on that really fast.
Well, I don't think it matters so much in the primary. If they were going to cut out these big networks for the debate between the Democrats and Republicans, I think it would be a bigger problem. But I do agree with the RNC when it comes to, it's been ridiculous that we allow moderators from CNN or MSNBC moderate our primary debates, and they really have no interest in advancing conservative principles, asking the right questions.
Or even being fair.
They don't, right, or asking fair questions among Republicans. So I understand where they're coming from. It's nice to see them take a stand on something.
Yeah.
I think that they should push for, more debates with moderators that they choose, because we all know that, that the moderator actually has a big influence in how these debates go. Candy Crowley is a perfect example of that. And so I actually kind of appreciate what they're doing. I know that, and it's in a primary debate, so I don't think that the low information voters would be really paying that much attention.
That's a good point.
Anyway.
That's a good point.
They're more, I guess, interested, if at all, they're more interested in their Vogue magazines and Cosmopolitan than they are, watching presidential debates. But I think it's okay for the primaries.
Okay, last question. If Rand Paul, Chris Christie, and Jeb Bush were facing off in the primary, and those were your only three choices, how would Katie Pavlich vote?
Oh, I'd vote for Rand Paul.
Okay.
I hate Jeb Bush.
Well,
Christie, I have problems with.
Okay.
Rand Paul is definitely someone I could get along with better.
Yeah, I'm feeling it too. I'll tell you, and it seems like that's who my audience is favoring too. Katie Pavlich, thank you so much for all you do. You can find
Thank
her
you. I
at
really appreciate it.
Katie Pavlich.